Namaste, Vanakkam, Jai Shri Krishna, Jumelang, and good afternoon to all of you. And thank you very much for this opportunity for the younger generation, although a bit old now, to say a few words at this very important memorial. Firstly, my condolences to Kamal and the Nanabhai family, and we wish you everything of the best at this extremely difficult time. My generation of the late 60s and early 70s met activists from the so-called Transvaal in the early 70s, particularly through Comrade Prema at the time. And that's when we had the first exposure to Reddy Bandia and Shirish Nanabhai, Murthy and others. And so began a long journey of working collectively between ourselves and what was then Natal and our comrades in the Transvaal. One of the things that struck me about Shirish until recently when I met him at Indus's funeral, and of course Comrade Isu as well, although it's tempered now, I'm sure, is the cigarette that you would find in their hands all the time. So even at the funeral I asked Shirish, so how many a day? No, it's a lot less than before. Is the answer you would get. But as we reflect on the contributions and the life of people like Shirish Bhai, and particularly in the current period that we find ourselves in South Africa, with all of its economic and political challenges. And as we say at many of these funerals, these are people who stood for A and B and C. And we say to ourselves, well, these are the lessons we need to draw from them. One of the big challenges is we remember the lesson in a hall. And when we go back to work and home and get involved in one form of politics or life, those lessons often disappear. And it requires moments like this, and with examples like Isu and others, to constantly remind us that to develop this courage, this discipline, this humility, and the spirit of sacrifice and service, as that generation did, and I hope future generations will, requires the same level of discipline and commitment and dedication to a new set of causes, which are equally important today as they were then. At that time, we were fighting apartheid. Today, we must build democracy. Today, we must re-inculcate those values of discipline and commitment to making sure that all the people of South Africa benefit from either the 0.9% growth that we have today, or hopefully the 5% that we will have at some stage in the future. From all the trillions of rands that we spend as government, and that the private sector contributes to our economy as well. Because today, more than ever, we need to say something about the courage and the heroism that characterize this generation and those who fought against two of the most vicious and racist systems of the 20th century. Fascism in Europe, and we had forms of it in South Africa as well, and apartheid in South Africa. Their hearts were burning with a desire to defeat racism and human exploitation. They sought to build a new world based on equal treatment of fellow human beings and driven by the ideal of human solidarity. For this, they were prepared to sacrifice their own lives and even find themselves in jail or in death eventually. They were prepared to deny themselves the comforts derived from privilege. This they did in order to create a fairer and a just society, much of which we have today. They took up arms, they mobilized people for a just cause, and built strong organizations to advance the struggle at that time, which is the same thing we need to do today to promote the democracy that we have and the wonderful constitution and its values that we have. Comrade Shirish Nanabhai was amongst these giants of our struggle, as you've already heard. They were vindicated, they won their battle and indeed their war. They defeated apartheid, as did many of you in your own right as well. and started building a society on the principles of the Freedom Charter, many of which principles are in our Constitution today. For over 20 years, since that time, our country has made significant strides in working for the realization of a united, non-racial and non-sexist South Africa. Shirish Bhai was a central player, a quiet player, but a central player, in breaking down the system that was declared a heresy by all humanity and continued to lay the foundations for a democratic future. For his part in the struggle against apartheid, as you heard, he was jailed, spent 10 years on Robben Island, banned and house arrested, and even had the courage, as did Comrade Prema, to get involved in the escape of Jenkins, Lee and Mombaras from Joburg Central Prison, I think it was.
Pretoria Central.
Pretoria Central. I'm still a Durban boy, so I don't know this part of the world. This did not stop him and his generation of activists from fighting for what they believed to be the liberation of all South Africans, black and white. They practiced what they believed in by joining for the struggle of all oppressed people, Indian, Coloureds, and Africans, to form a united front, and even democratic whites, to form a united front in opposition against apartheid. And in joining and working for MK, they practiced that non-racialism in real life every single day. Their struggle was characterized by the need to fight for a higher purpose. The higher purpose being the liberation of all South Africans, improving the living conditions of all, but particularly the poor. The establishment of a united, non-racial and non-sexist society would mean that a humane society characterized by social solidarity with democratic values would prevail. They defied what seems to be the mantra of today amongst many, that is to forget all and forget everybody else except oneself, generating not that sacrifice and selflessness that this generation and many others have stood for, and we still have people in South Africa today who will continue to do that, but instead giving in, as many are doing as well today, to greed and selfishness. For instance, democratic institutions and the well-being of our people are trampled upon in pursuit of self-aggrandizement. So today it's not enough for some to steal 1 million, you must have 10. When you have 10, you must have 100. For another class of people, making sure that you can get $1 billion from the state is one thing, next thing you aim for 10 billion rands. Because that's the kind of greed that today's capitalism and society is generating amongst our people. Shirish Bhai's generation set themselves higher values, without which they could not prosecute the struggle. These were values of selflessness, of sacrifice, of uprightness, of humility, not the hubris that we see today, serving and not taking from the people. Remember that every single cent that government allocates and the Premier in Gauteng allocates for housing, for example, or for a road to be built, or a bridge to be built across a small river that children have to cross every day to go to school, and which is not built properly, is a cent taken away from people's lives and pockets. And instead, those cents and rands, as I said, you can put as many notes as you like after that, find themselves in the pockets of individuals who then do all sorts of things with that money. They represented this generation, the best amongst us, and new generations, and particularly the younger people amongst us, need to find ways of emulating this generation. Never to be corrupted, never to be tempted to serve oneself. They remain our reference point, and one hopes they remain that reference point for many decades to come. They leave us with solid institutions from which to build on our democracy. But many of these institutions today are also being tested. They are also being influenced, or attempts are being made to influence them, to do the wrong things, and not serve the democracy that Shirish Bhai and others have fought for, and instead serve selfish interests. Our task is to improve and strengthen and not undermine these institutions and weaken them. These institutions will outlast all of us. We will all come as managers and premiers and ministers and what have you, but the institutions will go on. So the responsibility that those of us who are in these institutions have is to ensure that we leave them stronger, better, morally more correct, and more principled than we found them, so that the next generation can continue to build on that foundation that we have created. Good institutions stand between anarchy and our collective prosperity. The recent developments, such as the Constitutional Court judgment, are a testimony to the vibrancy and resilience of our democratic institutions, and all of us should be very proud of them. Institutions play a role in contributing to what we call inclusive growth. So in many parts of the world, you get 6 and 7 and 8% growth, but it's growth for the elite. It's growth that actually generates more inequality rather than greater equality amongst poor and rich. So inclusive growth is something you're going to hear a lot about from us, and one which is designed to ensure that all the people in the country and hopefully later in the world benefit from this number called GDP that we keep referring to. We must strengthen our social cohesion, such as the contribution that the Amit Kathrada Foundation is making, and combat our individual weaknesses. Institutions promote the idea of the common good and shared future, and that is why we need to defend them. In addition, we need to build our integrity today so that future generations understand what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable and what isn't, what contributes to our collective good and what contributes only to individual good. The defining characteristic of this generation of activists is that they never sought glory, wealth, or ill-gotten gains for themselves, and indeed passed on all of these opportunities and privileges. So the question we're left with is, what should we do to honor these legends of the democratic struggle and architects of our democracy, and in many ways of our future? The first is to reclaim and reimagine a higher purpose without consideration of the self. In other words, there must be a goal in life apart from saying I want to wear better clothes, have a better car, and have a lot more money in the bank account. And of course today, with what happened yesterday in Panama with the leakage of 11 million documents, the rich also have to be careful about where they keep their money. Otherwise they get exposed, you see. So watch for, as people trawl through these 11 million documents, let's see how many South Africans appear on that list. I'm no longer the tax commissioner, but we'll be very interested in what they've done with their money. So what is the higher purpose for ourselves? What is it that we want to aspire to every day? What kind of future do we want to build for our children and our grandchildren? And it is to rekindle the idealism that once defined the struggle for progressive change in our country, and still defines it for many of us. This struggle is to be based on optimism and hope, not despair. At the center of the struggle is the people without whom we cannot profess to lead. Ours is to serve with honesty, with ethical and moral uprightness. We will strive to emulate the leadership of the Tambos and Mandelas, and indeed the Chibas and the Nanabhais, which, and on all of them, are beyond the reproach of any criticism on these matters. It is a kind of leadership that rebuilds the social contract we have with our people. The Constitution that we have is the embodiment of the social contract. It's about how do we share to get to a better future for all of us. Once our actions are seen to be incongruent with this important document of our democracy, we must know that we have moved away from our duty to serve our people. We have broken the contract. This organization, the ANC, has been at the forefront of the struggle for most of the 20th century, and we should rediscover and reclaim its original purpose. That is the unity, non-racialism, non-sexism, and prosperity for all and not for the few. Our democratic institutions are continuously Our democratic institutions are constantly trying to hold us back from an abyss of a dismal future for us in many ways. Today the struggle is about the fight against corruption that has become endemic and infiltrated many facets of our society. The Shirish Nanabhais of the world would never stand up for that. They will never defend that. Indeed, they will give their lives again to fight it. This is diverting us and our limited resources away from the people into the pockets of individuals, as I've said. Our way of life has been captured by selfish interests. We must assist the capture of our hard-earned democracy and its institutions by a few for their own gain. This is the heritage of all of our people, the state. Our children must inherit a well-functioning state, a developmental state in real terms, which cares for all of our people. Shirish Bhai was a quiet, dignified, humble, but committed and dedicated servant of the ANC and of our democracy. His values must continue to inspire young and old in South Africa, and inspire them not to just sit back and say what's going on in this country, rather inspire them to become active participants in ensuring that we every single day enrich our democracy. It is these values of honesty, integrity, sacrifice, and selflessness that must force each of us to think carefully about our role in today's South Africa. Are we, as one writer said, locusts that destroy everything that they see, or bees that build and create for their own future and for our own benefit? And the choice is a very stark one. Hamagashre Comrade Shirish, and once again my condolences to the Nanabhai family. Thank you.